Chapter 8. A Perfect Day. The most unforgettable days rarely begin with extraordinary plans. They begin with an ordinary morning and a person you can't stop thinking about. The first rays of sunlight slipped quietly through the curtains, painting soft bands of gold across the hotel room. Seoul was already awake. Somewhere below, buses rumbled along the streets. Café doors opened to welcome the first customers. The aroma of freshly baked bread drifted from the bakery on the corner. The city stretched and breathed beneath a cloudless autumn sky, as if promising that today would become something worth remembering. Phoebe opened her eyes. For a few sleepy seconds, she simply stared at the ceiling. Then, she smiled. It wasn't because she had finally grown used to waking up in another country. It wasn't because today's weather was perfect. And it certainly wasn't because sightseeing was on her schedule. It was because she knew she was going to see someone. The thought settled gently in her heart before she had even fully opened her eyes. She buried her face in the pillow with an embarrassed groan. "Oh no." Her voice was muffled against the blanket. "It's happening." She rolled onto her back and stared at the ceiling again. When did this start? Yesterday? At Sokchon Lake? When he remembered her favorite cafes? Or perhaps on the airplane? No. She shook her head quickly. "Don't be ridiculous, Phoebe." She laughed quietly at herself. "You've known him for two time. Yet somehow, it already felt as though Seoul had become divided into two versions. The city before she met Jin Won, and the city afterwards. That thought made her laugh again. "You really have lost your mind." Her phone vibrated on the bedside table. The sound made her heart jump much more than it should have. She reached for it, trying to appear perfectly calm, even though nobody else was in the room to witness her pretending. A message waited on the screen. "Jin Won. Good morning, Phoebe. I hope you slept well. There's a little cafe I think you'll love. Would you like to meet at 10? She read the message once, then again, then one more time. A smile slowly spread across her face. He could have simply written, "Let's meet." Instead, he had remembered she loved discovering cafes. The little things. He always seemed to notice the little things. Her thumbs hovered above the keyboard. "I'd love to." Delete. Too enthusiastic. "Yes, thank you, delete." Too formal. "Of course." Delete. Definitely too excited. She sighed dramatically. "You are 28 years old." She looked around the empty room before pointing at herself. "Why are you behaving like you're 16? After another minute of debating with herself, she finally typed the simplest reply. "See you at 10. She pressed send before she could change her mind. Immediately afterwards, she covered her face with both hands. "Oh," she laughed into her palms. "I really sent the smiley face." For some reason, that tiny yellow smile felt far more embarrassing than it should have. Her phone buzzed again almost instantly. Looking forward to it, just 4 words. Yet somehow, they warmed the entire room. Phoebe climbed out of bed, humming softly without realizing it. She opened the wardrobe, then froze. What do I wear? The question caught her completely off guard. Usually choosing clothes took less than 5 minutes. Comfort first. Always. But today, she found herself pulling out one outfit after another. A pale blue cardigan. No, a cream-colored knit sweater. Maybe dark jeans. Too casual? The long green skirt she'd packed at the last minute because her mother insisted it looked lovely. She held it against herself in the mirror. She tilted her head. Too much? She changed again, then laughed. "If Mum could see me now." She could almost hear her mother's teasing voice. "Phoebe Tran, are you trying to impress somebody?" Her cheeks grew warm. "No." She paused. "Maybe just a little." The admission escaped so quietly that only the empty room heard it. She eventually chose a soft ivory sweater, a flowing navy skirt that allowed her to move comfortably with her crutches, and a light camel coat for the crisp autumn air. Simple, elegant, comfortable. Most importantly, it still felt like her. She brushed her hair carefully, fastening one side with a tiny silver cloud-shaped hairpin her mother had given her years ago. "You'll travel farther than I ever will," her mother had said. "Take a little cloud with you." Phoebe smiled at her reflection. "I did." She slipped her camera into its bag, checked for spare batteries, tucked her journal inside, and took one final look around the room before leaving. Outside, the autumn air carried the scent of roasted chestnuts and fresh coffee. Golden leaves drifted lazily along the pavement, dancing whenever a breeze wandered through the narrow streets. Phoebe breathed deeply. Every morning in Seoul still felt wonderfully unfamiliar. The crossing melodies of traffic lights, the gentle voices of shopkeepers arranging flowers outside their stores, students laughing as they hurried towards the subway. Even the language surrounding her had become comforting. She no longer felt like a tourist. She felt welcomed. As she walked toward the café, her camera rarely left her hands. She photographed an elderly couple sharing one scarf, a child chasing pigeons, steam rising from a street vendor's sweet potato cart, morning sunlight spilling across rows of tiny potted chrysanthemums. Life, beautiful, ordinary life, exactly the kind she loved capturing. She checked the time. 9:54. "I'm early." Then she laughed. "So is he." Across the street, standing beneath a tree dusted with golden ginkgo leaves, Jin Won was already there. He hadn't seen her yet. One hand rested in his coat pocket while the other held a paper cup of coffee that had long since stopped steaming. He looked at his watch, then toward the street, then back again, waiting. Phoebe smiled. "He came early." She lifted her camera almost instinctively. Click. The shutter sounded softly. Jin Won turned. Their eyes met. For the briefest moment, neither of them moved. Then his face lit up with a smile that seemed brighter than the autumn morning itself, and without either of them realizing it, the perfect day had already begun. Jin Won lifted the paper cup in his hand with a sheepish smile. "I was hoping I wasn't the only one who arrived early." Phoebe laughed as she crossed the street. "I was about to say exactly the same thing." "So?" He glanced at his watch before looking back at her, amusement dancing in his eyes. "We're both 6 minutes early." She nodded solemnly. "I think that's called good manners." "I was going to call it nervous." She blinked. "Nervous?" He smiled, taking a careful sip of his coffee. "I didn't say who." Phoebe narrowed her eyes, pretending to think. "I'll assume you mean yourself." "I wasn't going to admit anything. But now that you mention it," he shrugged dramatically. "I may have walked past this cafe 3 times before deciding to wait outside." She couldn't help laughing. "You? The man who looked completely calm on an international flight? I've become considerably less impressive since then." The ease between them surprised her. Only a few days ago, they had been strangers separated by an airplane aisle. Now teasing each other felt natural, comfortable, as though they'd somehow skipped the awkward stage most new friendships had to survive. Jin Won noticed the camera hanging around her neck. "You've already been taking photographs." She looked down at it. "I can't help it." "What caught your eye?" Phoebe turned the camera around and showed him the screen. An elderly couple shared one scarf while waiting to cross the road. The husband had tucked the edge around his wife's neck without either of them seeming to notice. Jin Won smiled. "I've walked this street hundreds of times. I've never seen that. You probably weren't looking for it." "What do you mean?" She studied the photograph for another second before answering. "People think photographers are searching for beautiful things." She looked up. "We're not. We're searching for honest moments." He quietly absorbed her words, honest moments, Somehow. That described Phoebe better than he could have. Nothing about her felt rehearsed. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She simply noticed beauty where other people hurried past. "You know," he said, "I think that's why your photographs feel different." She tilted her head. "You've never seen my photographs." "No, but I've seen the person taking them." For reasons she couldn't explain, that compliment settled somewhere much deeper than she expected. Not because he had praised her, because he had understood her. The little wooden sign above the entrance swayed gently in the breeze. The morning bean. A climbing vine wrapped itself around the doorway, tiny white flowers blooming among rich green leaves. The café looked less like a business and more like someone's secret hiding place. Phoebe smiled before they had even stepped inside. "I already love it." "I knew you would. You sound very confident. I've learned something about you." "And what's that?" "You smile with your eyes before your mouth." She stopped walking. "I do?" "You just did." "I've never noticed." "I have. For a heartbeat." Neither of them spoke. Jin Won suddenly realized what he had admitted. His ears warmed slightly. "I mean," he rubbed the back of his neck, "I notice people's expressions." Phoebe smiled. "You notice mine." He didn't deny it. Instead, he reached for the cafe door and held it open. "After you." The tiny brass bell above the entrance chimed softly as they stepped inside. Warmth embraced them instantly. The aroma of freshly ground coffee mingled with butter, cinnamon, and freshly baked pastries. Bookshelves stretched from floor to ceiling, filled with well-loved novels, poetry collections, and travel journals. Soft jazz floated through hidden speakers. Sunlight poured through tall windows, turning floating dust into tiny golden stars. For a moment, Phoebe simply stood there. She slowly turned in a circle, taking everything in. "Oh," her voice was barely louder than a whisper. "This might be the most beautiful cafe I've ever seen." An elderly woman arranging cakes inside a display cabinet looked up and smiled knowingly. "I said exactly the same thing the first time I came here," she said. Her silver hair was tied neatly into a bun, and a flour-dusted apron hung loosely around her waist. "You must be Phoebe." Phoebe blinked. "You know my name?" The woman smiled toward Jin Won. "This young man has mentioned you." Jin Won nearly dropped the menu he had just picked up. "Mrs. Park, I merely said we were bringing a guest." Mrs. Park folded her arms, pretending to think. "Oh? I seem to remember someone saying she likes little cafes with lots of books and sunlight." Phoebe slowly turned toward Jin Won. "You described me?" His face had become noticeably red. I wanted to find somewhere you'd enjoy." Mrs. Park laughed warmly. "I've known this young man since he was in high school." She leaned closer to Phoebe and lowered her voice conspiratorially. "He never worries this much about choosing a cafe." Jin Won covered his face. "Mrs. Park." "What?" She grinned. "I'm old. I've earned the right to embarrass people." Phoebe laughed so hard she had to steady herself against one of her crutches. The sound filled the cafe like sunlight. Jin Won looked at her. Not the room, not the customers, only her. He realized something then. He had heard many people laugh before, but none of those memories sounded quite like this one. Mrs. Park caught the look on his face. She smiled quietly to herself. Some things only age teaches you to recognize. She had seen that expression before, many years ago, when her own husband had first looked at her across a tiny bakery not so different from this one. She decided not to say anything. Some stories needed time, and this one had only just begun. Mrs. Park disappeared behind the counter with a knowing smile, leaving Phoebe and Jin Won standing in comfortable silence. Phoebe glanced sideways at him. "You really told her all of that?" Jin Won avoided her eyes as he studied the menu with exaggerated concentration. "I might have mentioned one or two things." "One or two?" She laughed. You described my favorite kind of café. He finally looked at her. I wanted today to be special. The words slipped out before he had time to think. His expression immediately changed. I mean, he cleared his throat. I wanted you to enjoy your last few days in Seoul. Phoebe smiled gently. I know what you meant. Did she? Truthfully, she wasn't entirely sure. But somehow, his awkward honesty felt more sincere than any perfectly rehearsed compliment. They chose a small wooden table beside the tallest window in the cafe. Outside, golden ginkgo leaves drifted lazily through the morning breeze, occasionally swirling together before settling onto the pavement below. Sunlight poured through the glass, wrapping the table in a warm glow. Phoebe looked around with quiet admiration. I could spend the entire day here. Jin Won rested his elbow lightly on the table. I had a feeling. You seem to have a lot of feelings about what I'd like. I've been paying attention. The answer came so naturally that neither of them realized how intimate it sounded. Phoebe looked away before her smile became too obvious. Mrs. Park returned carrying 2 handcrafted ceramic mugs. A vanilla latte. She placed the first mug carefully in front of Phoebe. And 1 Americano for the serious gentleman. Jin Won sighed dramatically. I've told you before. I'm not serious, Mrs. Park laughed. Dear, I've known you since you were 16. You've always looked like someone carrying the weight of the whole world. Phoebe looked curiously at him. Really? Mrs. Park nodded. Even as a teenager? He smiled politely. He studied hard. He never caused trouble. But children shouldn't look that tired. For a brief moment, the smile on Jin Won's face faded. Only for a second. Yet Phoebe noticed. She always noticed. Mrs. Park seemed to realize she had wandered into painful territory. She quickly brightened again. But today is different. She looked proudly between them. I haven't seen him smile this much in years. Jin Won nearly choked on his coffee. Mrs. Park. What? She folded her arms innocently. I'm simply stating facts. Phoebe couldn't stop laughing. Mrs. Park winked before disappearing back into the kitchen. The laughter gradually settled into a peaceful silence. Phoebe wrapped both hands around her mug. The warmth seeped into her fingers. She closed her eyes for a moment. This smells amazing. Jin Won watched her smile into the steam. He wondered, how could someone make drinking coffee look so peaceful? A few minutes later, Mrs. Park returned carrying a large slice of strawberry shortcake. Phoebe blinked. We didn't order cake. I know. Mrs. Park smiled. It's on the house. Oh, we couldn't. You absolutely could. She pointed at Jin Won. He looked so worried choosing this cafe that I decided he deserved encouragement. Jin Won buried his face in one hand. I don't think I'm ever escaping today's embarrassment. Phoebe laughed so hard tears gathered in her eyes. Mrs. Park quietly placed 2 forks beside the plate. Only 2. Then walked away. Phoebe stared at them. So, I suppose we're sharing. Jin Won looked equally uncertain. If you're all right with that. I'm Australian. We share food. He smiled. I'm Korean. We pretend not to want dessert. Then secretly eat half. Phoebe burst into laughter again. I like your honesty. She carefully cut the first piece. Here. She offered him the fork. He looked surprised. You first. No. You bought coffee. You first. He smiled. You know. We're going to spend the next 10 minutes arguing over cake. Probably, Mrs. Park called from behind the counter. Young people. Just eat it before it melts. The entire cafe laughed softly. Phoebe covered her face. I'm never coming back here. Mrs. Park grinned. Oh, you'll be back. The confidence in her voice made Phoebe smile. She wasn't entirely sure why. Eventually, Phoebe surrendered. She took the first bite. Her eyes immediately widened. Oh, Jin Won laughed. That good? She nodded enthusiastically. Unable to speak, she simply pointed at the cake. He couldn't help smiling. You really like desserts. She swallowed. I don't like desserts. You love desserts. There is a difference. And what is it? She looked thoughtfully at the cake. If I like something, I'll eat it. If I love something, I'll remember it. Jin Won looked at her quietly. I think that's true about people, too. Phoebe froze. Neither of them said another word. The café suddenly seemed much quieter. Outside, a little girl walked past, holding her father's hand. A cyclist rang a bell while weaving gently through the fallen leaves. Someone nearby laughed. Life continued around them. Phoebe traced the rim of her coffee cup, then quietly asked, Can I tell you something I've never told anyone outside my family? Jin Won looked at her. There was no hesitation, no curiosity born from gossip, only quiet attention. You can tell me anything. Phoebe looked out through the window, watching her own reflection shimmer against the autumn street. She took a slow breath, then began to speak. Phoebe continued watching the street outside. A gentle breeze swept through the avenue, lifting golden ginkgo leaves into the air like tiny pieces of sunlight. They twirled for a moment before settling softly onto the pavement, where people stepped around them without a second thought. I've told my parents this, she said quietly. She smiled faintly. But I've never told anyone else. Jin Won didn't interrupt. He didn't rush her. He simply waited. Phoebe appreciated that more than she could explain. So many people think I came to Korea because I love K-dramas. She laughed softly. I do. They're wonderful. But that isn't why I came. She lowered her eyes to the creamy swirl of her latte. When I was little, I used to look at maps. My dad had this old atlas that smelled like dusty paper. I'd sit on the living room floor for hours. I'd point to countries and tell my parents, One day I'll go here. She smiled at the memory. My mom would always smile. My dad would laugh. Jin Won smiled. I can imagine that. Phoebe nodded. I believed it. I truly believed I'd see the world. Her fingers tightened around the warm mug. Then I grew older. The smile slowly faded. So did everyone else's expectations. People started saying things like, maybe somewhere closer. Maybe when someone can go with you. Maybe next year. Maybe it's too difficult. Maybe it's too dangerous. She looked out the window again. You know what's strange? No one ever said, maybe you can. Her voice remained calm, yet every word carried years of quiet disappointment. They loved me. I know they did. They weren't trying to stop me. They were trying to protect me? She swallowed gently, but sometimes. Protection and limitation look almost identical. Silence settled between them. Not heavy, not awkward, simply respectful. Jin Won rested both hands around his coffee cup. He could hear the emotion beneath her words. Not anger, not bitterness, only sadness. The sadness of dreams that had spent years waiting for permission. So, he asked softly, what changed? Phoebe smiled. My grandmother. The one who gave you the cloud bookmark? She laughed. Not yet. That's another story. My grandmother used to tell me something whenever I was afraid. She looked toward the sunlight dancing across the window. A bird doesn't ask the sky whether it's allowed to fly. It simply opens its wings. Jin Won repeated the words quietly. A bird doesn't ask the sky. She nodded. The night before I booked my ticket, I couldn't sleep. I kept looking at airline websites. I'd click, then close them. Click again? Close them. She laughed at herself. I probably opened the booking page 20 times. What stopped you? Fear. What finally made you press confirm? Phoebe looked directly into his eyes. I realized if I kept waiting until I wasn't afraid, I might spend my whole life waiting. The words settled gently between them. Jin Won looked at her for a long time. Then, very quietly, I think you're one of the bravest people I've ever met. Phoebe immediately shook her head. No. I was terrified. Exactly. She frowned. Courage isn't about not feeling fear. It's choosing your next step, even while fear is holding your hand. Phoebe stared at him. The cafe around them seemed to disappear. Where did you learn that? My grandfather. He fought in the army when he was young. He used to tell me, fear visits everyone. Only courage decides to stay for tea. Phoebe laughed through the emotion gathering in her eyes. I think I would have liked your grandfather. I think, he smiled warmly, he would have liked you too. For a little while neither of them spoke. Mrs. Park quietly wiped a nearby table, pretending not to notice. Soft jazz continued floating through the cafe. Outside, someone cycled past with flowers balanced carefully in the front basket. The world felt wonderfully ordinary. Phoebe realized something. She wasn't thinking about her crutches. Not once. She wasn't wondering whether people were watching her. She wasn't worrying about walking too slowly. She simply existed. Comfortably. Freely. It had been a long time since she'd felt that. Jin Won slowly stirred his Americano. The ice had almost completely melted. Phoebe noticed. You've barely touched your coffee. I forgot. You forgot? I was listening. She smiled. That might be the nicest thing anyone's ever said about my storytelling. He laughed. I don't think you realize how easy you are to listen to. She looked down, suddenly shy. You say nice things very naturally. No. I say true things. Her heart stumbled again. After a moment, Phoebe tilted her head. My turn. He blinked. My turn? I've answered your biggest question. Now you answer mine. He smiled. That sounds fair? She studied him for a second. Not his clothes, not his smile, his eyes. There was kindness there, but also something tired, something carefully hidden. She had noticed it several times already, especially when people mentioned family. She spoke gently. What makes you sad? The smile on his face disappeared. Not dramatically. Simply, quietly. The spoon in his hand stopped moving. Outside, a bus rolled past the cafe windows. Neither of them noticed. He looked down into the black surface of his coffee. For a long moment. He said nothing. Phoebe immediately regretted asking. I'm sorry. You don't have to answer. I didn't mean to. No, he interrupted softly. I'm glad you asked. He took a slow breath, then another, before finally looking back at her. You're the first person who noticed. Jin Won's gaze drifted beyond the cafe window. Outside, people passed by without a care in the world. A young couple shared a scarf against the cool morning air. A little boy chased leaves across the footpath while his mother laughed behind him. Life moved so effortlessly. He wondered what that felt like. You asked what makes me sad, he said at last, his voice almost lost beneath the soft jazz playing overhead. The truth is, he let out a quiet breath. I'm not sure where to begin. Phoebe didn't speak. She simply waited. Some stories needed silence before they could find their voice. Jin Won traced the rim of his coffee cup with his thumb. My family owns one of the largest construction companies in Korea. Phoebe nodded gently. I remember you mentioning it. When I was a child, he continued, everyone used to tell me how lucky I was. They'd smile and say, your future is already waiting for you. He smiled, but there was no joy in it. I believed them. When you're a little boy, you think adults know everything. He looked down. So I never questioned it. I went to the schools my father chose. I studied the subjects he believed were important. I learned English because it would help the company. I attended dinners with business partners before I was old enough to understand why they were important. Phoebe listened quietly. She noticed something. He wasn't speaking with anger. He was speaking with exhaustion. As I grew older, he continued, people stopped asking me what I wanted to become. They already knew. I was going to become my father. The words lingered between them. Phoebe imagined a young Jin Won, a little boy wearing a school uniform far too neat, trying desperately to make his parents proud, trying even harder not to disappoint them. Did you ever tell them? He looked at her. Tell them what? That you wanted something different. He laughed softly. Not because it was funny, because the question itself felt unfamiliar. I don't even know what different looks like. The answer broke something inside Phoebe's heart. How could someone spend 30 years following a path without ever being allowed to ask whether it was truly theirs? Mrs. Park quietly walked past with a tray of freshly baked scones. She caught Jin Won's eye for a brief second. There was kindness in her smile, not pity, just understanding. She disappeared into the kitchen again without interrupting. My father isn't a bad man, Jin Won said after a while. I don't want you to think that. He loves our family. He built everything from nothing. He worked harder than anyone I've ever known. I admire him. Phoebe nodded. I can hear that. But his voice grew quieter. Sometimes love arrives wearing the clothes of expectation. He believes he's giving me the best future possible. He just never realized. It might not be the future I would have chosen. Phoebe lowered her eyes. Those words sounded painfully familiar. Her parents had wanted to protect her. His parents wanted to prepare him. Different reasons. The same result. Two people who had quietly begun living lives shaped by someone else's fears. She looked back at him. And the woman? He knew exactly who she meant. His shoulders sank ever so slightly. You remembered. You looked sad when you mentioned her on the plane. A gentle smile touched his lips. You notice more than most people. She shrugged. I have a camera. I suppose I've trained myself to notice things. He smiled. Then you probably noticed. I never called her my fiancée. Phoebe thought back. He was right. He hadn't. You said everyone expected it. He nodded. Her name is Young Seo. We've known each other since we were children. Our families are close. She's intelligent. Kind. Elegant. He paused. She deserves to marry someone who loves her. Phoebe's chest tightened. And you don't? He closed his eyes briefly. I care about her. I always will, but he struggled to find the words. When I'm with her, it feels like we're acting in a play. We know our lines. We know where to stand. We smile at the right moments. But neither of us ever forgets. There's an audience watching. Phoebe felt tears prick her eyes. What about when you're here? She asked softly. When you're drinking coffee with me. Jin Won looked around the little café, the bookshelves, the warm sunlight, Mrs. Park humming quietly in the kitchen, the half-finished slice of strawberry cake between them. Then, he looked back at Phoebe. His smile this time was different, smaller, but completely real. It feels... He searched for the right word. Quiet. Phoebe tilted her head. Quiet? He nodded. I don't have to think about what people expect me to say. I don't have to wonder whether I'm representing my family well. I don't have to be the future president of a company. He laughed softly. I can just be... He hesitated. Jin Won. Phoebe's eyes glistened. You know, I like him. He blinked. The real Jin Won. She smiled through the tears threatening to spill. I hope I get to know him even better. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The sounds of the café faded into the background. Neither noticed Mrs. Park quietly looking over from behind the counter, smiling to herself before returning to her work. Jin Won had spent years surrounded by people who admired his achievements. This was the first time in a very long time that someone had simply wanted to know him. He had expected sympathy. Instead, he found acceptance. And somehow, that was far more frightening, because acceptance had a way of making walls feel unnecessary, for the first time in years. Jin Won found himself wondering what it might feel like to stop carrying the weight of everyone else's expectations. And sitting across from him, Phoebe wondered something too. Not whether this man was handsome, not whether he was successful, but whether loneliness could exist, even in someone who seemed to have everything. Neither of them realized it, but without intending to, they had each just handed the other a small piece of their heart, and neither wanted it back.